Dr. Rick Pettigrew, welcome to Underground.
Thanks very much. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, it's a pleasure. Known you for a few years, and you have a very compelling, interesting theory to share today on one of history's most enduring mysteries. So thank you for being here. And Underground features independently minded archaeologists like yourself, anthropologists, historians, and science renegades on controversial topics and themes such as early complex culture, unexpected finds, ancient migration, diffusion, ancient technology, and the like. And you, my friend, I think fit well into, I don't know what I would say, certainly archaeological mystery in general. You have a PhD. You're the president of the Archaeology channel, which is supported by the not-for-profit Archaeology Legacy Institute, for which you are the founder and executive director. You've been a consultant for 43 plus years with kind of a focus in the Pacific Northwest. At least that's, I think, your reputation in some ways. You have a BA in psychology from Stanford, and you have both a master's and a PhD in anthropology from the University of Oregon. You've conducted hundreds of projects and published numerous technical works, including contributions to the Smithsonian Institution Handbook of North American Indians, which I know is a terrific publication. You are a peer reviewer for several journals, including for the National Science Foundation. Bravo there. And you have served on the film festival juries in France, Germany, Iran, which is interesting, and Italy, and you're an experienced film producer and the recipient of the Society of American Archaeology's Award for Excellence in Public Education. So you have been very busy. It's great to have you here. And what I miss in your bio?
Well, thank you very much. I'm happy to be here. And I feel lucky to be able to be in this position, really.
Yeah. Did I hit all the key points, or is there anything that defines you professionally or personally that you want to throw into the mix?
Well, I'm not someone who talks a lot about himself. You know, I think you've covered a lot of ground there, and maybe along the way some other things will pop out. But yeah, I don't really have anything to add to that at this point.
Okay, good. Well, let's start from the beginning, shall we? And this is always an interesting question, I think, for archaeologists who are career archaeologists, because, I like to say it's not a job or a career, really. It's a calling for many of us, because it can be a tough way to make a living. But what attracted
Yeah.
you originally to archaeology?
Well, I've always had a fascination with the human past. When I was a kid, I just gobbled up all kinds of books about the ancient world and so forth. I was always filled with curiosity and kind of followed my interests. I never really imagined that I would really be an archaeologist. I just was interested in the topic. Originally, I was going to be an astronaut.
Yeah.
Sure. When I was a kid, that was my passion. I mean, I was around when the first people went into space, and I wanted to be one of them.
Yeah.
So I was really a lot into the hard sciences. I was pretty much of a generalist, but the hard sciences attracted me most. And so when I went to Stanford, I was a physics major for a couple of years. So I was heavily into mathematics and physics and computer science. I was involved in computer programming going way back to about 1967, when a computer filled up a whole building, and that computer was probably less powerful than your cell phone is right now. But in any case, I learned the basics of programming. But then around midway through my career at Stanford, I sort of had an epiphany and decided to move into the social sciences. I got really fascinated by human behavior, which is still pretty perplexing. But I moved into the social sciences, graduated in psychology. I did take a lot of anthropology along the way, because I'm really interested, in not just ancient cultures, but in different cultures, indigenous cultures around the world. I've always been fascinated by that too. So when I had a chance to go to graduate school, I always thought of myself as having an academic career. So when I went to graduate school, I made a choice. I decided I would go into anthropology because that fascinated me more than psychology. I felt like the cross-cultural approach of anthropology was a more valid way of interpreting human behavior than, you know, doing tests of college sophomores, as psychologists often do. So I went into anthropology. I was accepted to University of Oregon. I'm kind of a West Coast guy, so I wanted to stay on the West Coast. I grew up in Washington, went to school in California, and ended up in Oregon. And then I came here to Eugene. That was a long time ago now. That was in 1970. And then very soon got into the academic path for an anthropologist, and very quickly gravitated to archaeology because for me, archaeology is an empirical science. It involves the use of hard data, physical data, which I was used to, from uh, my days focused on the physical sciences. And a lot of the methodology is similar to the physical sciences. And a lot of the specialties that are used by archaeologists are connected to the physical sciences. So I was just naturally attracted to that. Besides, I like mystery. I like solving puzzles. Every archaeological site is a puzzle, you know.
Hmm.
And as you gather data from the site, you make up an interpretive narrative to account for the evidence that you find in an archaeological site, which for me is just exactly what we're doing, with this approach to the Amelia Earhart mystery.
Yeah.
So that was how I got into it. And in being in Oregon, I focused on local archaeology. And so for decades, I worked on Oregon archaeology. After I got pretty far in graduate school, I got hired for a position with the Museum of Natural History on campus. I was the Oregon State archaeologist, a highway archaeologist for about 10 years. That was a big time traveling around the state. It's a big state. Um, I drove about 10,000 miles a year traveling around to do surveys of archaeological sites uh, in connection with Oregon highway projects.
Wow.
And I did that for about 10 years. So that's like 100,000 miles of travel from site to site within the state of Oregon. Yeah.
Dedication.
And yeah. So, yeah, that's kind of how I got started. And, one thing led to another.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, you are the president of the Archaeology channel, which does great work. And I know you have a very popular film festival. So that's a bit of a departure from consulting or from highway archaeology. How did that transition occur?
Well, after my stint as the highway archaeologist, I went into the private sector. I joined up with Mike Morado and Infotech Research in California. We did a lot of really cool projects there. But after a time, I got a little tired of doing contract archaeology, writing all kinds of wonderful reports that ended up on dusty shelves and nobody looked at. Even though they were outstanding reports, of course. But the thing is that I got really frustrated that the great work we were doing about exploring human past was not really being shared very well by archaeologists with the general public. And I always felt that, what we're doing in archaeology is coming to an understanding of who we are and where we came from. And that information should be shared with people everywhere, right? Because it's all about human beings and we should share it with the rest of humanity. We weren't doing a very good job. But by the late 90s, streaming media became possible. And that fascinated me because that was a way of telling stories from your desktop via video. And I think, that's a really good way to do that. Besides that, I've always been into video. When I was doing archaeology years ago, I always was using video. I mean, I used a video notebook. So I carried my camcorder around the site with me. And I shot video images of everything that I was working on with my own narrative, soundtrack. And that was the way I did it. So I was really used to video. I was really into family videos. I've got some great videos of my three daughters growing up. So I was very much into video at the time. And I combined that interest with my desire to tell the human story. So when the technology became available, I naturally gravitated to streaming media. And, about that time, I was in my 50s. I thought, well, do I really want to keep doing this contract archaeology thing, until, till the end? No, I didn't want to do that. I wanted to do something more exciting and more it was more in line with my passion of really telling the story that we were learning through archaeology. So I decided to found Archaeological Legacy Institute. That was back in 1999, and to create the website, the Archaeology Channel, which is a streaming media website, and it's actually, I think, one of the oldest, longest running streaming media websites that exists in the world.
Yeah. Wow.
It's still going on, and we have hundreds of videos there. So that's kind of how I got into that. I was really a passion to tell the human story. It's all connected with my interest in technology and the uses of media for telling stories and the uses of video. And that path led me to where we are today. I mean, we've put up our first streaming videos on the Archaeology Channel. We refer to that as TAC.
Mhm.
The first TAC videos came up in the summer of 2000. That was 25 years ago.
Wow.
That's a quarter century.
Yeah.
So I'm very proud of that. If you look at the history of streaming media, we go way back to the earliest days.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We've followed that path since then with a lot of spin-offs.
Yeah.
And we can talk about spin-offs.
You're definitely way ahead of your time on that front. So I applaud you. I've been dabbling in the archaeology media space for a long time, and yeah, you're ahead of the curve, so to speak. So congratulations on that. And it's also a great excuse to throw a big festival party once a year with all your friends and colleagues.
Yeah, I mean, we started out with streaming media, which we're telling stories remotely by video on our website. But very quickly, I wanted to do that to a live audience. So, I mean, I became aware of other archaeology film festivals around the world, and connected with people, connected with the festival organizers, learned what they were doing, and decided that, well, we should do that, right? Because there wasn't any archaeology-related film festival in the Western Hemisphere at all back in 2000. But we started, our film festival in 03, the Archaeology Channel International Film Festival. So now we're in our 23rd year.
Amazing. Yeah.
So we've been doing it every year, and we invite film entries from around the world. We're currently receiving film entries, lots of them from around the world, for our 26th festival, which is going to be in May 13th through the 17th.
Okay.
It's not an online film festival. It's an in-person film festival. So if you want to see the films on the big screen, you got to come here to Eugene. There was one year when we did it virtually, and that was during the pandemic.
Yeah.
And that kind of led us to other areas, including our subscription platform, Heritage Broadcasting Service, which you can find at heritagetac.org.
Well, if you're going to, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, that's just another spinoff. I mean, I can rattle them off. We started doing audio programming in 01, the audio news from Archaeologica. That's our podcast. But, it wasn't a podcast. The word podcast was not in the lexicon when we started doing audio programming back in 01. And in 05, when podcasting became the thing, we naturally moved into the podcast arena. But it's the same show that we had 4 years before. So we've been doing it now for 24 years now, continuously every week without a break.
Yeah. Well, if you are going to tell archaeology stories, you've got to tell stories that have a really good through line. You have to tell something, tell of the story itself needs to be compelling to a broad audience. I should put it that way.
Right.
And a lot of archaeology stories are not necessarily compelling to those outside of the niche or the discipline. But there's a couple out there that are very popular across a broad audience, and Amelia Earhart is one of them. And I know this is a story you've pursued. for quite a number of years now. Uh, how did you become interested in Amelia to begin with?
Well, I think the main connection is through Tom King, Dr. Tom King, who is a longstanding colleague and friend going way back into the 90s. Um, he was the archaeologist for Tiger, the International Group for Historic Aircraft Recovery, and a colleague of Rick Gillespie, who is the executive director of Tiger. Tom and Rick started working together on that back in 1989. And as he was my friend, of course, I watched that from afar, like, wow, that's kind of cool. And you know, he and I talked informally about it a lot. So I just naturally followed it and got interested in it. Then when we started doing media programming on the Archaeology channel, I was looking for interview topics, just as you are, Mike,
That's right.
looking for interview topics, and ended up actually interviewing Tom King and Rick Gillespie for an audio interview. Just go to TAC, just go to the Archaeology channel, and look in our interviews section, and you'll find that. So way back in like, oh god, it was like 2004 or something like that. I interviewed um, Rick Gillespie and Tom King, and then later Tom King came to our film festival as a keynote speaker, and his topic was, of course, the search for Amelia Earhart. And I interviewed him during that time as well, and put up a video interview with Tom King about the Amelia Earhart search, which you can find on TAC. It's still there. Go look. And you know that just I just kept pursuing that interest, and I got really enough interested that I looked for ways to go with Tom to Nikumaroro, that is the island um, that Tiger has been proposing since 1989, was the final destination for Amelia Earhart and her navigator Fred Noonan. Um, and you know, I kept communicating with Tom over the years, trying to find ways to go. I thought actually might be able to go in the 2015 tour with him. And I narrowly missed out on the chance to do that. But then he went back with another group in 2017, and we found a way to make that happen. So I actually went there with Tom King and others on a tiger-related expedition in 2017. Um, I was actually had a connection with National Geographic at the time. I was shooting footage for them, and they paid my way on the boat, so I was able to go. And I went. We were on the island for about 8 days. Totally fascinated. We found some really cool stuff.
Incredible.
And Tom at the time was working at the Seven site. That was his focus. That's the site where it's believed that the bones were found in 1940, and he's worked on that quite a number of times and found lots of interesting artifacts, which are consistent with the interpretation that that's where Amelia camped and where she probably died. And there are artifacts there that are consistent with that
Yeah,
interpretation.
let's jump into that in just a minute. I do want to ask a question because it's always something that has piqued my interest, which is, what is it about Amelia? She sort of falls into the category of Titanic. There's this huge public interest in this particular topic. Now, what do you think it is about the story of her disappearance that titillates the public so much?
Well, I think that the core of it is that it is an incredible mystery, and people are drawn to mysteries. But this mystery has special significance because it relates to someone who was extremely popular in her time, and someone who was a kind of revolutionary figure, an iconic figure, at a very specific moment in history, in world history, when aviation was a hugely popular topic. At that time, you know, the airplane had only been invented, what, the Wright brothers in, what was it, 1904 or something like that. So it's only a matter of like 3 decades that the airplane had existed. So people were pushing the limits of what an airplane could do. And, all kinds of records are being set, altitude records, distance records, speed records. People were fascinated by aviation. And Amelia, of course, was fascinated by it too. And she was unusual because she was a female. She also was lucky because she hooked up with some very influential people, George Putnam being her husband and publicist. So she came along at a unique time in history, and uh, she also her personality was one of a risk taker, someone who liked to push the limits, someone who was a little stubborn, and wanted to prove that even though she was a woman, she could do anything that any man could do. Of course, that resonates with a lot of people nowadays. That part of the story, but it resonated with people in those days too, actually. And so she was a hero. And she, first woman to fly across the Atlantic Ocean. She set all kinds of speed records, altitude records, at least 2 ticker tape parades in New York City. She was a world renowned figure.
Yeah.
So when she took off in 1937 to fly around the world, that was big news. There were like 1 billion people around the world following her path. They didn't have TV, of course, but they had, newsreels in the movie theaters, and they had radio, and people were very interested. Newspapers were covering it. And she was sending back daily reports as they traveled around the world. So when she disappeared, it was a huge shock, incredible shock. She was one of the most famous people in the world at the time. Um, and then the search, was a big story. Like, they went out looking, they spent millions of dollars searching the ocean, and the military got involved, and it was in the newspapers all around the world, actually.
Yeah.
And then the disappearance was never resolved.
Yeah. Yeah.
And people since that time have been looking and looking, and the story keeps popping up and popping up as people, make new proposals about maybe having evidence that might resolve the mystery and so forth. That's happened over and over again. So the story keeps popping up.
Yeah. Well, she had made it a good chunk of the way around the world. It seems like perhaps 2/3 or 3/4 of the way. And she was en route, if memory serves, to Howland Island. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah.
But but
That was the longest leg of the journey.
okay.
Uh, yeah, it's about 2,500 miles. The Electra aircraft was designed for long distance flight, but they had to specially outfit it to go such a long distance across the ocean. Carried lots of fuel on board. Um, yeah, that was the longest leg. It was the highest risk leg, and it turned out to be actually the final leg of the journey.
Yeah. Well, she's en route to Howland Island, but then Tom King is presenting this idea that she wound up on Nikumaroro. How did that happen? I mean, they're not immediately adjacent by any stretch.
Well, there's a very logical process of coming to that conclusion. A variety of things. The radio transmission, the final, well accepted radio transmission that were recorded by the Coast Guard. Amelia said that she was going to fly on a line of position. It's a line on the map, which runs generally north-northwest to south-southeast. She's saying, we're on this line. We believe we're on this line. We're going to fly north and south along this line in an effort to find Howland Island. I could go through the navigational details, but basically, uh, Fred Noonan was on board. He had instruments for navigation which are typical of ships. He was basically a ship navigator for a long time before he transitioned into be an aviation navigator. But he used the kind of instruments that a navigator on a boat would use. So he was able to mark the time of the sunrise on their as they approached Howland Island, and that told him exactly where they were on the map using a chronometer and the angle of the sun. So he knew he was on that line, and she transmitted that. If you travel north along that line, there's no land until you get to Kamchatka. So there's no way. If you go that way, you're taking a risk. If you're north of the island and you keep going north, you will not survive. However, if you're south of the island and you go a little bit north and you don't find it, you can head back south, and you know that you're going to find land one way or the other, either Howland Island or another one of the islands to the south.
Okay.
That line actually runs through very close to Nikumaroro.
Hmm.
It's about 300 miles to the south. And we believe that that's what she did. She followed the line, which she said she was going to follow, and encountered Nikumaroro and had to put down, had to land the aircraft. Otherwise, it would have run out of fuel and ditched in the ocean, which, of course, a lot of people believe that's what happened. That was the official military explanation for the disappearance. But there's plenty of evidence that indicated that she landed safely, especially the radio transmission evidence of the time after the disappearance.
Okay, so she, according to the theory, she goes down on Nikumaroro. There is some. I've read a bit about it. Some interesting stories of transmissions received that kind of point in that direction, and some triangulation that was done that suggests they were somewhere in that area.
Right.
You mentioned that there's reason to believe she survived. Well, obviously, if they're making radio transmissions, somebody's alive to do that. Was there
Mhm.
any other, or is there any other evidence that you're aware of to indicate that they had survived the crash?
Well, first of all, it wouldn't have been a crash. People use that term a lot, but she must have landed the aircraft safely, we believe, on the northwestern reef flat of the island, which is very flat. There's a portion of it there that's extremely flat, just like and it's big enough to land an aircraft. It's flat like a tarmac. At low tide, she could have landed the aircraft there. And the hypothesis has it that she landed there, and then over the next 5 nights, put out radio transmissions, which are documented. As you mentioned, the radio bearing information from islands to the north, including Oahu, Midway, Wake, uh, they got some radio bearing data. The lines that those bearings describe tend to intersect right close to Nikumaroro, which is a good piece of evidence. Then you have people receiving messages from her. She was putting out SOS Mayday kind of messages. Some of them at length, people recorded them or remembered them, especially Betty Klink in Florida, teenager, listening on her dad's shortwave radio. He had put up a long antenna in their backyard so they could receive long distance transmissions. And she was just surfing on the on the radio one evening, and she heard the voice of Amelia Earhart.
Yeah, yeah,
And yeah, there's quite a story. You should look that up.
yeah. I've heard about that, and can you imagine? That's
Yeah,
a long ways away, Florida, other
yeah,
side of
it is.
other side of the planet. Let me ask you this,
Mhm.
just for clarity's sake. So when she put down on the north end of the island, you're suggesting, or the theory is here, the hypothesis that she went down on the reef. So she landed probably or potentially in shallow water on a wide reef area. So if she is broadcasting, sending out transmissions from the plane, and I'm just trying to imagine what this might have looked like from their perspective. Presumably, she's exploring the island, or she's off on the island during the day. She's coming back. She's making her way across a wet zone, the reef to the plane, broadcasting from there. Does that sound about right?
Yes, that's the idea. The climate there is such that you don't want to be in an aircraft fuselage in the middle of the day.
Yeah, a little toasty.
You get fried. So yeah, you need to escape during the day and find a shady spot on land, which you can do from that location. I've been to that spot. You can walk across the reef to the beach and back and forth. It's maybe a little bit dangerous. It's kind of slippery.
Mhm.
In some places, a little bit sharp, but it's very shallow. So the tide rises and falls. She could have traveled back and forth to the plane at low tide, but would have preferred to put messages out at night, not only because it's cooler at night and more tolerable, but also because radio transmissions travel farther at night. And she, of course, knew that. That was why Betty in Florida was able to receive that transmission.
Mhm.
Because long distance radio transmissions are easier because the ionosphere rises during the night, and the radio wave bounce off the ionosphere, and so you can receive messages that are very far away, actually, or that come from far away. In fact, it's often the case that someone at a distance can hear the transmission better than someone that's close at hand.
Interesting.
because because it's the reflective characteristics of the ionosphere.
So, I know there were rescue missions. You mentioned earlier that the Navy was in the vicinity, not too much longer, or too much thereafter that she went missing. There were some
Right.
planes that had flown over. How could they have missed her, especially with the bearings and the triangulation?
Yeah. Well, of course, they knew about the radio transmissions and they were using that information to help guide them on the search. So that's why they made sure to search the Phoenix Islands. Um, but um, having been there and having flown a drone on the island, I know that it's not that easy to pick somebody out from the air. I think they were flying at least at 500 feet, maybe higher than that. When you're at that altitude, it looks sound like a low altitude, but when you look down, it's really hard to pick out anybody on the ground.
Well, what about the plane on the reef?
Yeah, that's it. See, I think if the plane, first of all, that flight, that search plane arrived about a week after the disappearance. So let's say on July 9th, I believe that's the case. All right. So what that tells me is that sometime just before the night, the plane was picked up by the water and carried away.
Ah, okay.
So yeah, the radio transmissions ended by about July 7th, July 6th or 7th. There was the last radio transmission that's been recorded. So sometime between that time and July 9th, the plane was swept off the reef. And Tiger has done a lot of research on this. They've gone back and they've modeled the tides at that time, and they've concluded that the the high tide got higher and higher during the week, and eventually would have uh, prevented her from turning the prop on the starboard engine, which would have prevented her from doing any more radio transmissions. But when it reached a high enough level, it would have simply picked up the aircraft and subjected it to the surf. And I think that's what happened. The plane was picked up maybe right about the 6th or the 7th and crashed up against the rocks of the reef and broken apart.
Hmm.
And part of it floated through the passage into the lagoon. When the tide rises, water rushes into the lagoon through that passage.
Okay. And I think this seems like a logical segue to the Taria object,
Sure.
which is going to be the focus of an upcoming expedition for you, and a
Hmm.
subject matter that you and I have chatted about for a number of years. So, what is the Taria object?
Yeah, the Taria object wasn't a thing until 2020. Um, a gentleman named Michael Ashmore in California noticed it himself. He's a kind of aficionado of the Amelia Earhart mystery, knew all about the Nikumaroro hypothesis. So he was looking on Apple Maps, just looking around in the reef area alongside the Taria Peninsula. That's a big peninsula that juts down from north to south into the lagoon. It's the Taria Peninsula, named after a famous Maori warrior. Anyway, um, he saw this thing in the image. And you're looking at it right there, I guess. So that was fascinating to him, and so he raised a red flag. He basically went online and said, "Hey, everybody, what's that?" He went first to Tiger and presented this image to Rick Gillespie and Tiger, and Rick has his forum on the Tiger website, and they examined it, looked at it, kicked it around, kicked some ideas around. At the time, I wasn't terribly fascinated by it because I thought, oh, here's another one, right? People are always pointing to things like, look, I think I found the aircraft. And so, I've been kind of jaded over the years about that. And so I looked at it and I thought, well, that's interesting, but I was busy on other stuff and I didn't really pay a lot of attention to it. But Tiger had their forum and they kicked it around and concluded that it was probably a tree. I didn't really care too much at the time, but later the following year, it was brought to my attention again by other people, my friends, and I decided, well, let's take a look at it. So I looked at it more in detail and carefully, examined the evidence, and it didn't look like a tree to me. Um, so I invited Mike Ashmore to come to Eugene. And in 2021, we had an Amelia Earhart conference connected with our film festival. We have a conference every year that's connected to our film festival. We invite filmmakers and others to come and talk on topics relating to cultural heritage. And we were having a symposium on the Amelia Earhart subject. So I called up Mike, said, Mike, come and tell us about the Taria object. We were looking at all different possibilities. And I should step back a little bit. Um, in terms of the history of the Amelia Earhart research, 2019 and 2020 were kind of a down period because, we were there on the island in 2017 and, we found some interesting evidence, but no smoking gun. Everybody's looking for the smoking gun. And then 2019, Tom King went back to Nikumaroro, did some more work at the Seven site. Robert Ballard, the guy who found the Titanic, was there with his Nautilus ship, funded by National Geographic. I think they spent a couple of $1 million on that project. And they funded Tom King going to the Seven site. They also sent a team to Tarawa, the capital of Kiribati, the country where the island is located, looking for what might have happened to the bones that were found in 1940. They had disappeared, during World War II. Nobody knows where they went. So they were in 2019. There was a big effort to try to find that smoking gun. If they found the bone, they could have gotten DNA evidence and maybe confirmed that those were the bones of Amelia Earhart, but they weren't able to find them. And Bob Ballard was unable to find any traces of the aircraft in the deep water off the reef at Nikumaroro. And Tom King was unable to find any more traces of bones at the Seven site. So after 2019, those of us who were interested in exploring the topic of Nikumaroro and the disappearance of Amelia Earhart were very disheartened. So what are we going to go? What do we do from here? Because we're not going to be able to probably raise enough interest and go back to the island, to raise the funding that's necessary to do a project like that. It seemed like a dead end. And then the very next year, Mike Ashmore pops up and says, "Hey, what's this?" So then in 2021, he came to our conference, and we were all kind of grasping at straws at the time, like, where do we go from here?
Mm-hmm.
So he came and made the presentation. I looked at what he had to say. I got really fascinated, and I pulled together some funds from a group of friends, and we went out and we bought a bunch more satellite pictures, trying to figure out, do we have other pictures of this thing? When, has it been visible for a long time? So after sampling a bunch of pictures, it became evident that the object became visible in the satellite imagery in 2015, and it was still visible in 21, and we kept following in the imagery, and now we see it all the way into 2024. I haven't seen any 25 pictures yet, but it's visible in one form or another from that time.
So the first, the first year that it's visible in the aerial is 2015?
Yeah, the first time it becomes visible in satellite images is in April of 2015.
Okay, so let me ask you this: so we have 8 or 9 years of images, and in that timeline, the object doesn't move substantially or at all. And
At all.
if it were a tree, one might imagine if it's organic, it would decompose substantially, sitting in the surf like that.
I don't know how long it takes for a tree to decompose, but to me, it doesn't look like a tree. And it's still there after a long period of time. The question is, how long has it been there?
Yeah.
Another factor here is that what might have made it visible in 2015? Well, it turns out Tropical Cyclone Pam came through the Pacific in March of 2015. That's one of the most powerful storms ever to be recorded in the South Pacific. It had a huge storm surge. Nikumaroro is about 600 miles from the path of the storm, but evidence around the Pacific indicates the storm surge was huge, and it would have impacted Nikumaroro. In fact, we see evidence of the damage of the vegetation on the southwestern margin of the island in imagery from in April of 2015. we have a picture from February and another one from April, and the April picture shows damage from the storm. So
Well,
the
let's
storm
right
surge,
now. I think I pulled that up. This is April 27th, 2015.
yeah, yeah. This is the first of a sequence of images. You want to run that? I mean,
Yeah.
we basically aligned all those frames from the satellite images so that you can see the changing look of the Taria object frame by frame through all the satellite images. You go ahead and run that.
Okay. Yeah. Walk us through what we're seeing here. So 2015.
I've analyzed all these. Some of them are very fuzzy. Some are really sharp. Um, but they all have the same orientation. I've divided the object into three parts. The biggest part, the longest part A, the part that extends to the north, part B, and then there's a small stub to the south. I call part C. And you see these same parts in many of the images going forward. And then as you proceed forward through 2018 and beyond, it looks like the object is becoming covered by sediment and it's becoming less and less visible. So part A is the most visible part, apparently standing up. And then it becomes more of an impression on the bottom of the lagoon. It looks like a V or an L shape. And so this one is the final one. It looks like a triangle, a dark triangle with a couple of ears. Right? And that is the tri object. It doesn't appear to be the actual object. It looks like the impression of the object in the bottom of the lagoon after having been covered by a thin veneer of sediment. That's how I interpret it. So
So
I think when we go
it
find it there.
is it. So it's your contention that up until 2015, it's quite possible the object had been buried for a significant part of its history. And it was the storm that exposed it. And now we've had about a decade of varying levels of exposure.
Right.
And perhaps it's now the beach is migrating again to cover it up and obscure it.
Right. Yeah. I don't think it's the beach so much. It's just the sediment that builds up at that location during the years when there aren't any strong storm surges that move it away. So there are times when the sediment is building there, and other times when it's eroded away. I make the analogy to a shipwreck on the beach. And in many places, you have this situation where the ship is buried in sand most of the time until a big storm comes along and washes the sand off the shipwreck and it makes it visible again. And then after a time, the natural deposition of sand proceeds and covers up the shipwreck again. I think they were dealing with a similar situation.
Okay.
Now, if we go back in time to the helicopter video that Tiger shot in 2001, we see a white spot at that very location, which appears to be a reflection of the sun off the bottom of the lagoon. So that's evident that it was there in 2001. And then if we go back to New Zealand aerial photographs from 1938, we see an object in that general vicinity from two different directions in the lagoon alongside the Taria Peninsula. So I think we have evidence that that object had been there since at least 1938.
Well, and you say reflection, that would suggest it's a reflective surface, and likely metallic. A tree decomposing in the lagoon is not going to be reflective. I wouldn't think.
Right. That is true, and that's how I interpret it. Some have objected to my interpretation of the reflection, but I don't see an alternative to that. I don't know of any white trees. And I don't know of anything that would persist over such a period of time and remain in that fixed location for a long, long time like that.
Okay.
So I think it's a real object. But we can argue until we're blue in the face about what's there and how to interpret it. The only way we're ever going to find out what it is to go there and look at it. So that's what we're going to do. Yeah.
So let's talk about what you think the object actually is. I mean, you spoke of the Electra being out on the reef, likely was broken up, beat against some rocks, and then portions of it, uh, the incoming tide into the lagoon and presumably settled in this area. So, I have a slide up here, slide 17, and it's showing a scale image of the Electra 10E adjacent to the debris here, or to the object, I should call it.
Yeah.
Talk to us a bit about what you've learned in insofar as scale is concerned.
Right. Yeah. Well, this series of objects actually is a little bit erroneous because the actual size of the aircraft is a little bit bigger. We're working on trying to correct those images. Basically, it's a little bit bigger than that, but these images are intended to show how we interpret those different parts of the object. So, uh, but the uh, our decision to go to the island doesn't depend upon knowing what part A, part B, and part C are.
Sure.
It's simply a model that would account for that pattern. Um, so I think what we're looking at likely, and I can't say absolutely, we won't know till we go there, is at least a portion of the fuselage, a part of the tail, and possibly a part of the starboard wing structure.
Okay.
It wouldn't look like an aircraft because it was broken up quite a bit. So in my interpretation, after the aircraft was lifted off the reef and bounced up against the rocks, parts of it would have come off. The landing gear would come off. The wings, especially the outer wing, would come off. I think very likely the enough buffeting would cause the engine to separate from the fuselage. And so all that was left would have been the fuselage with the tail attached, which would have been very buoyant because when Amelia flew the aircraft, she had lots of extra fuel on board in huge tanks packed into the fuselage. She in fact had to crawl over the gas tank, to get back to her navigator behind it.
Okay.
So it would have been very buoyant, um, at least for a time. And my interpretation is that ultimately the rising tide sucked the buoyant part of the aircraft, basically the fuselage and the tail, through the passage, directed it to the opposite shore, where the natural vortex would have carried it along that shore to the point of the peninsula where it was lodged in place, and ultimately became fixed in place, and sediment settled around it, and basically lodged it in place, and ultimately became part of the landform.
Mm-hmm.
That sand spit that you see in this picture wasn't there in 1937.
Huh.
There was a little stub of land there, to be sure, but if you compare the aerial imagery we have from 1938 and 1939, which clearly show the peninsula, you compare that to later images, you can see that the sand spit grew very quickly between 1938 or 39 and 1985, when it was fully developed in its present shape. Now, the lagoon and the peninsula have probably been there for at least 4,000 years. Now, that's what the geology suggests. And for a sand spit to grow that quickly, I think requires some explanation. And I think very likely what happened was that the object became lodged in place and diverted the current, and thereby changed the depositional dynamics at that location, and ended up creating a sand spit.
Well, that's an interesting idea. It never occurred to me. It's made a little breakwater of some sort, or to change the
Yeah,
hydrology.
exactly. I mean, it's just like in a river, when the river changes course,
Sure.
um, the change in the velocity, or the current direction and the velocity, will change the shape of the deposits that the river leaves behind.
Sure.
So, when you change the current, then you change the shape of the forms, the landforms that are created by the sedimentation.
So I've spent some time diving into this topic, and really studying these images a couple of years ago, when we were chatting about getting out there. And the dark shadow area that you can see on the left side of the image, which presumably would be one end of the fuselage, appears in some images, and I can pull them up. Whoops, I can pull them up in a minute, but it does
Sure.
appear to kind of be a cavity of sorts. And
Yeah.
I had thought that perhaps this was an engine cowling.
Hmm.
But what do you think about that idea?
I don't think that's likely to be the case. Why don't you go back to the animation of the satellite pictures and let's look at that. Yeah, let's look at that black spot.
Get to
I find it useful. Actually, you were there.
I was okay.
Yeah, go to the sequence. That would be 20
Now here.
21.
Are you going to
Yeah.
go to
So just
21?
play that video again, and let's look at that white spot. Okay, so or that black spot. Let's look at the black spot. It
For
continues.
the we'll watch it right now. All right, starting
There
at
it is.
2015. There it is.
There it is. Okay. So that black spot continues. It changes shape a little bit. In some places it disappears. It kind of goes away in part of it, and then it kind of comes back. And I have looked at that over and over and over and over. The black spot appears and disappears. I think there are two variables involved with that. One is the angle of the sun, and the other is the depth of the sediment. My interpretation of that black spot is that it is, in fact, a shadow.
Okay.
And that shadow disappears when the sun is in the southeast, to the southeast of the object. When it's to the north, northeast, northwest, the black spot is there. And then as time passes and parts of the object become less visible, I think it's because the sediment is building up and the sediment is filling in that space that where the shadow was, and the shadow disappears. So I think it's a shadow. I don't think it's an engine cowling. I don't think it's a root ball of a tree. I think it's a shadow.
Okay. Yeah.
And
On this particular image, well, we might zoom into it later to get a better look, but it does sort of have an oval. It's almost like you're looking at a circle from an oblique perspective, and it's sort of an oval appearance to it.
right.
But you've looked at it
Right.
more than
And
I have.
the shape of it changes over time. Sometimes it looks very angular, very, very rectangular. Uh, Sometimes it's longer, sometimes shorter.
Okay.
And again, I think it's because it's a shadow, a solar shadow. There's something projecting up that's casting a shadow. I don't know what it is for sure, but I have some ideas about it. One of those ideas is that the site has been disturbed. Now, we know that the colonists knew of an aircraft or the remains of an aircraft on the island. They reported that there was an aircraft wreckage on the island before they arrived, and they actually mined it for aluminum. There's lots of aircraft aluminum found on the island by Tiger. And there's, of course, a lot of debate about where it came from. But we have testimony from the colonists that they recovered aircraft wreckage aluminum from the island in two main locations, one out on the reef and number two alongside the Taria Peninsula, specifically on the west side of the Taria Peninsula. That's documented by Tiger in interviews. And curiously, the Taria object is right there on the west side of the Taria Peninsula. So my interpretation is, my best guess, there's the colonists right there.
Okay.
My best guess is that they actually knew about it. They went there periodically. They messed with it. They moved things around. They took pieces of it. And it's very possible that they could have just left something sticking up, like a piece of the tail. If they were mining it, I can imagine people going there, pulling stuff, putting it in place, setting it up so that they can come back and get more. And that part of it would have been closest to the beach, closest in this most shallow area and most easily accessed. So I think that end has been disturbed. And however it was disturbed, we won't know really until we go there and take a look at it. But that's another example of why we shouldn't expect to find something that is a pristine wreckage.
So let's talk about look, I think it's in my opinion, my humble opinion, it's unlikely to be a tree. Let's say that it's not Electra. Well, I guess the question is, what else could it be? It could be
That's
another airplane, I suppose, that nobody knows about, but it seems to, again, depending on your interpretation of some of the early images, which we'll talk about in a minute, it's been there a long time, so it had to have predated Amelia, likely, which is hard to imagine. Could be a part of of a vessel. There is that shipwreck, the SS Norwich City. Do you think it's
Yes,
possible this is debris from the Norwich City?
right. I wouldn't say that it's impossible, but I would say it's not likely. The Norwich City, it ran aground on the reef, not far from where we believe Amelia landed in 1929. It's a big freighter made of heavy iron. Um, in order for the tri object to relate to that, we would have to be able to imagine something from the shipwreck that floated through the lagoon all the way over to the Tria Peninsula. Now, I can't say that it's impossible because we know, in fact, that there was a metal tank that did float into the lagoon that was found on the south shore of the lagoon by Tiger, a metal tank, which now has disappeared. So it's not impossible. But we found all kinds of traces of the Norwich City shipwreck, big, heavy iron things. It'd be hard to imagine how that they would have made their way across the lagoon all the way over the Taria Peninsula. Uh, so yeah, I can't say it's impossible, but it's a pretty big piece. And how it would have floated over there, what it could have been, it's hard to imagine.
Mm-hmm.
The only other thing that you mentioned is maybe another aircraft. Yeah, that's possible too. It's just that nobody has any record of any other aircraft being lost in the vicinity of Nikumaroro.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay, we've
Yeah.
got the aerial image we looked at. Of course, you're seeing some pretty clear images by 2015, but you also have data that goes back earlier than that. It's a little more speculative, but the reflections you've talked about. What is the earliest visual or image data that you have suggesting there's an anomaly in that location?
That's from the 1938 New Zealand photo aerials. Uh, the New Zealand military was there in 1938. They were looking at Nikumaroro as a possible um, airfield location for flights traveling across the Pacific. They were surveying islands at the time. So they were there, they surveyed the island and they flew around it. They took pictures all the way around the island. In two of those frames, uh, one that was taken from the north side, another taken from the south side, we have an anomaly. We have what looks like the same object visible from two opposite directions. It's very bright.
There does appear to be something in that location. So let's just
Mhm.
assume that there's that the object is there. It still could be something that has fallen off the Norwich City. Although the Norwich City was a fairly new wreck at the time, so it wasn't uh, decom sort of falling apart, so to speak, from weathering and casting off large objects. I wouldn't think at that point in time. I could be wrong, but that's just projecting here, speculating. Uh, but does it also it makes it something of a stretch to consider that it would be an airplane that is not the Electra? How many planes were flying through that area in the mid 1930s?
Well, really nobody. And there were no planes flying through that area in 1930s. It was not part of the theater of war in World War II. The Coast Guard was landing PBYs on the lagoon, servicing their Coast Guard Loran installation, which was there between 1944 and 1946, um, at the eastern end of the island. And they accessed it by PBY landing on the lagoon. But they didn't lose any PBYs, so that doesn't account for it. The Norwich City, another thing about that is that it's all a lot of dark iron. Um, and you wouldn't see something that was white colored or light colored. It would not be reflective from the Norwich City. A lot of dark rusted metal comes from the Norwich City, but not something that's shiny reflective that we see in many of the pictures that we've referred to. Starting in 1938, running through the helicopter video 2001, continuing into the satellite imagery starting in 2015, we see a lot of evidence of reflection. which is would not be expected from something coming from the Norwich City.
Mm. So you mentioned a number of expeditions that have been to the island, including at least one that you've been on yourself. And I know in the past you've said that there were people who had gone to that location, the Taria area, and had perhaps probed around a bit, but came up with nothing. How can you explain the fact that they didn't find anything?
Yeah, I think if I were there at that time with them, I wouldn't have found anything either. Um, and they had metal detectors with them, but of course, most of the Electra aircraft was aluminum, not iron. And for a metal detector to detect something, you have to be right on top of it. And the location of the tri object out there in the shallows is not an easy spot to go to. And even if you did walk by there, you could easily have missed it. As you can see in the helicopter video, it's visible only at a certain angle. That is, reflection is visible only at a very narrow angular range. So if you don't walk right on top of it, it's going to be very difficult to see it. Also, you wouldn't expect it because the water there is fairly shallow. It appears, if you walk the beach, it appears that there's not enough space for an object as big as the Electra to fit in there, right? Um, but that is the case only if you imagine that the landform that we see today is the landform that was there in 1937. That's why I keep pointing to the imagery of the sand spit from 1938-39. I think the water was deeper. The object floated in, the Electra floated in. Uh, it got lodged in the water, still below the surface, and then the sediment filled in around it. The sand spit was formed, and the object became effectively part of the landform. So people walking there in 2001, not knowing that history, wouldn't imagine that something of that size could fit there.
Mm-hmm.
But what the way it looks today is not the way it looked in 1937.
You know, did they employ a magnetometer in their search?
Don't think so.
Okay.
They use side scan sonar in the lagoon, but I don't know just exactly where they directed that. And we don't have any data specifically about where they walked or exactly where they deployed their instruments. And as far as I know, they didn't use a magnetometer. So all I'm saying is that with the knowledge that they had in 2001, it would have been very difficult for them to find this because they were doing a broad search. They knew about the possibility of something floating in through the passage, of course. And so they searched along that entire beach. But even though it's a small island, it's a big island when you're on it.
Yeah.
A lot of area to look at.
Well,
So,
yeah.
you just had to you had to be at that specific spot in order to find it.
But nobody has been back since 2015. No, am I correct?
Well, nobody's been to the island since 2019,
2019.
but the visits to the island in
Okay,
2015, 2017, 2019 did not go over to the vicinity of the Taria Peninsula.
Okay. Yeah, because it wasn't
Nobody
until
was there then
21
looking.
when Michael Ashmore brought the images to you that you were able to.
Right.
Okay.
So nobody's been there since the discovery of the Taria object in the satellite imagery.
Yeah. All right. So I think that's important to point out because that message gets lost a little bit in some of the discussions I've had. Because obviously you could pinpoint this, based on the aerial images and go out there with a metal probe and determine very, very quickly whether there's something in that location. And metal probes are great because you can get some sense of the vibratory response, whether you're dealing with organics or you're dealing with metal. So, and then of course, while it is in a tidal zone, that is a difficult spot for any kind of a marine archaeological investigation because it's affected tidally. And even if you have side scan and magnetometer, if you're there at the wrong tide, and you have any kind of depth to your hull, if you're drafting, more than a foot or so of water, you're going to have a difficult time getting in there. I mean, this to me feels like it's a situation where you go in your bathing suit and you tow a mag by hand, and that would give you some potentially effective returns. But
Right. So we're going to be employing that kind of methodology. We have the advantage of knowing precisely where it is. We can still see it in the satellite imagery. We're going to bring drones with us. We'll be able to get overhead views of it. We're going to have an underwater drone there. We're going to do magnetometry, a side scan sonar. We're going to do hydroprobing, and then finally, the final step will be the dredging. You know, the suction hydraulic dredging to remove sediment from it and directly observe it.
excellent. So I do want to talk to you more about that in just a minute. Let's pivot for a second and talk about Seven Sight and some of the other. You touched on this a bit earlier, but I'd like to get into it a little bit more. Some of the other sort of corroborating evidence, if you will, that Amelia was here, and what's been found.
Right. Well, to begin with, that's the location we believe where the bones were found. There was a skull and some long bones that were found there by the colonists, and their colonial official, his name was Gallagher. He caught wind of it and went back and recovered as much as possible from that. And had it brought to Fiji, to Suva, where it was examined by a doctor at the colonial hospital there in Suva. That doctor made a report. He measured the bones, filed a report. Other artifacts were found with it, including a transit, not transit, but an instrument box, and some other things that were interesting. And they imagined at the time it might be Amelia Earhart, although the British did not want to make a big deal out of it. There was some friction there between the Americans and the British about who controlled the island and so forth.
Interesting.
But anyway, the bones were found, some artifacts were found, they were documented, reported, and filed away. The reports filed away, and then the bones were lost, and the report just got sort of forgotten in the files. And it was decades later that report was found by Tiger with the measurements. And after, an analysis back and forth, the measurements are consistent with the size of Amelia Earhart. So Tiger did a lot of study to figure out where that location was. They went back there, they did excavation, and they found artifacts. Tom King being the archaeologist, they found artifacts that are consistent with the presence of an American female from the 1930s. So, it's all, you might call it circumstantial. Like much of the evidence that exists for the hypothesis, for the Nikumaroro hypothesis, none of the individual pieces of evidence are conclusive. But when you put them all together, it's very powerful evidence that this is actually what happened.
A preponderance of evidence can be enough to send somebody to the electric chair. So we do make conclusions, draw conclusions based upon preponderance. I mean, to me, that's pretty compelling. Considering some of I remember there was a shoe found. It was consistent with the type of shoe she might have worn.
There's lots of evidence. We mentioned the radio evidence. I should also mention the Bevington object. You're familiar with that, right? That was a picture. Oh, the Bevington object. Okay, go back to 1937. The British had a survey team on the island in October of 1937, only 3 months after the disappearance. They were there scoping out the island for installing a colony, which they installed the next year on the island in 1938. One of the people there was a guy named Bevington, who had a camera with him. Among other things, as they were departing the island, he took a picture of the island, which shows the northwestern part of the island, the reef flat, and the Norwich City aircraft, or rather, Norwich City shipwreck. And if you look very carefully in the left side of that image, there's something sticking up from the reef.
I am aware, yeah.
Right? That's the Bevington object, taken by a guy named Bevington, a British guy. He was actually interviewed, before he died by Tiger. And if you do a careful analysis of the picture, blow it up, process it, that object looks a heck of a lot like the landing gear of the Electra. It's very, very powerful evidence that actually is a piece of the landing gear of the Electra sitting on the lagoon, or rather sitting on the reef, um, at approximately the location where we believe that she landed her aircraft.
Yeah.
So there's that, plus the artifacts found at the Seven site, plus object or artifacts found elsewhere on the island, including, when we were there in 2017, we found a shoe which just reeks of Amelia Earhart. I mean, it's her style, her size. Um, we found a 1930s flashlight at that location and other stuff. So, there have been other things found on the island, but you can't prove, of course, that they were deposited there by Amelia Earhart's aircraft. But it all fits together. It all fits together somehow.
This is I I don't know if there is it's even possible, but I'm going to throw it out there. Would it be possible to find trace DNA on some of the objects that you found, like the shoe or the flashlight?
Yeah, in fact, we submitted the shoe for DNA analysis, and it turned out there was no DNA remaining on the shoe.
Okay.
So another dead end in that respect. But the shoe, oh my goodness, it looks like her size. It's the kind of thing she wore. I mean, it's the style from the 1930s. And why would it be there? I mean, do you really think that the colonist women that were there who came from the Gilbert Islands, you think that they would have been wearing something like that? I think that's a stretch.
Wasn't there a container of a sort of a freckle cream or something, a
Yeah,
concealer?
there's a container of freckle cream found at the Seven site. And it's well known that Amelia was embarrassed by her freckles, right? She wanted to hide her freckles. So, I mean, help me out here. Why would a jar of freckle cream from the 1930s be on that site?
Yeah.
I mean, who would have put it there? Would have been, I mean, people have speculated about it. That's not far from the Coast Guard installation that was there between 44 and 46. So maybe some Coast Guard guy, had something like that. Maybe a girlfriend of his, was
Plausible.
ashamed of her freckles, and I don't know, he carried something in the jar with him and dropped it there. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, the seven site is on the, I don't want to say the opposite side of the island, but it's a reasonable distance away from uh the Taria object. What do you have any speculation why she may have wound up down there?
Well, and that's a lot of speculation. I come back to the question of what do you do if you're stranded on an island like that? You have survival is your number one goal. You need to be in a place where you can survive physically, and it's really hot on the island, and water is a real problem. The island has some water sources on it. We know of a couple of freshwater ponds. We don't know if she would have known about them or had direct access, or if the ponds even had potable water in them at the time. But water would have been a big thing. So, in order for her to survive, she would have had to find a place where she could live, where there was shade, and ideally where there was a breeze, where it could have been more comfortable, and where possibly she had access to water. That site is next to a hardwood forest. Some of those trees are big and they have cracks and crevices in them that collect water. She might have been getting water from the trees there. I don't know. It's purely speculative, but she wouldn't have been able to last very long without water. So, as far as her finding a place to camp, she would have been concerned with, those survival factors
Yeah.
rather than where it was in relation to the try object.
Well, with regards to um how long she may or may not have had to live. I mean, what do you kind of play out a hypothetical scenario? If you were to develop a timeline, she loses contact, she loses the ability to broadcast after, what do we say, day 5, day 6?
Yeah,
So
about day.
she's marooned with Fred on this island. You know, play it out. What do you think happened at that point?
Well, there's a lot of speculation, for one thing, about what happened to Fred. The Betty notebook and her description of what she heard has suggested to people that Fred might have been injured. He might have been hurt, and he might not have survived long after that. We don't know. It's speculation. But in any case, after about 5 days, the aircraft would not have been available anymore for her. Transmission of the radio no longer possible, but survival would be the key. If you're camping on the shore near where she landed, you're not going to have any water. You have to go someplace. You have to find a place where you can camp and survive. Water being an important factor. So you can walk all around the island. The island is about 4.5 miles long. So it's possible to walk around the island and looking for places to camp. And I can imagine that she did that. Whether Fred was still alive or not, we don't know. He might have passed away. In any case, she surveyed the island trying to find a place to camp and ended up at what we believe is where she ended up at the Seven site for whatever reason. Maybe access to water, maybe at that spot, which is kind of on a ridge between the ocean and the lagoon. There's a better breeze at that spot because it's more exposed to the wind. Maybe that was a factor, the shade, the breeze, and maybe access to water. And she would have, of course, tried to find food, and there's evidence of shellfish being collected there, turtle shell, other things like that. There's evidence of campfires. I don't think that food is the biggest problem on the island. There are plenty of animals there, like especially the coconut crabs.
Okay.
Which are delicious, and have lots of meat on them. But of course, you have to be able to cook them. And there's evidence of campfires at the Seven site.
Yeah.
So we don't really know. I mean, how long she survived there would have depended on her access to water and whether she was healthy. If she had cut herself on the reef, trying to walk back and forth across the reef, she might have gotten infection. Infection is one of the big challenges there. There are bacteria, microbes in the reef that are actually deadly if you get them into your body and you get an infection. So that could have been a problem, but it's all speculation. Now, the British were there in October of that same year, just 3 months later, and they actually walked all the way around the island, but they followed the beach, and they didn't find evidence of Amelia Earhart. They were not looking for that, by the way. So I would presume that she was no longer surviving by that time.
Yeah.
That's what we know.
Yeah.
We can't say anymore. It's really speculative. There have been various attempts to tell that story, including a book by Tom King on that subject.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, it's we have these images of Tom Hanks surviving with his volleyball, marooned on an island somewhere for years and slaying fish with great precision using home crafted spears. I mean, it's not easy. I mean, I'm imagining when she used her last match for her last fire. That may have been a dark day. It's tough to make fire. And you're doing this on your own, and you're doing it, you're dehydrated and you're weak, and you're exposed. And so 3 months, if she had made it more than 3 months, it would have been a terrific story of survival. But it's fascinating. I'm thrilled that you're going back. Niku is a rough place, as you've described. And we in the past have talked about designing an expedition, and I know there are a number of challenges, including there's really no place to anchor your vessel. Tell us a little bit about your plan and how you're going to address some of those logistical challenges.
Right. Well, we're going to take 2 ships from Majuro in the Marshall Islands. It's about a 6-day sail to Nikumaroro. As you say, there's no anchorage, so the boat has to basically go in orbit outside of the island, off the southern shore of the island, close to what is known as the blasted channel, right? Otherwise referred to as the landing channel. But that's a channel that was blasted through the reef by the British when they pulled the colonists off the island in 1963. They did that to make it easier to remove the colonists and everything from the island. So there's a channel there that you can take through the reef right to the beach. It's narrow. You can take a small boat through there to the beach. That's the way to access the island. So our ships have to basically uh, uh, stay offshore, off the end of the channel. Are you going to have that there?
I was going
Okay.
to pull this up. So you're talking about this location right
I got
here?
it. So that's barely the channel, very barely visible to the left southwest corner of the island.
Okay.
Um, yeah. Anyway, we don't anchor the boats. We can't anchor the boats. The boats just have to stay offshore. Then we take smaller boats to the channel, to the beach. Then we have to walk across the south uh, part of the atoll. It's about 300 yards to the lagoon through the jungle. Then we have to bring a boat around through the passage into the lagoon, which will serve as a ferry between uh, the south shore and the north shore of the island. So we everything has a name there. So we have the blasted channel, then the pathway that leads over to the lagoon is called the Gallagher Highway, and the location at the beach where we take off by boat is called Club Fred, named after Fred Noonan, and then across to the Taria Peninsula. So we're going to be going back and forth there day by day, and then walking back to the beach and taking the boat back to the ships to the channel. So that's our daily routine.
Wow. So you'll stay at night on the vessels.
Correct. Yeah, we're not going to be sleeping on the island. The authorities of Kiribati don't want that, and it's not very comfortable because you have to fight off the crabs.
Okay. Well, we know those coconut crabs can be formidable. They get pretty big.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
okay, so you talked a little bit about what you're planning to do on the Taria object itself to confirm, well, hopefully that it's Electra. Obviously, you're in an area with very fine, well, not obviously, but my understanding, it's very fine sediment, which can be very difficult to work in.
Yes.
And there can also be suspended sediments in the water column that obscure your ability to look down and get visual contact with your object of investigation. How will you overcome some of those challenges?
Yes, they're not easy. First of all, we're going to avoid disturbing the site for as long as possible.
Okay.
So the first thing we do is imaging, aerial imaging uh, by drone. We have an underwater drone. We're going to drag some magnetometers across the surface to try to get remote imaging of it that way. We're going to do side scan sonar, again, in an effort to avoid disturbance of the site until finally, once we've satisfied ourselves that we have all the imaging we can get and we know precisely where it's located, or at least as much as we can with the remote sensing, then we go in with a hydroprobe and physically probe the sediment to encounter the object and determine the margin of the object with the hydroprobe. Once that's done, that's going to disturb the sediment. We might decide the visibility might go down to zero, but we're then going to be deploying the hydraulic dredge to remove sediment from the object. It's very possible, very likely that visibility will go to zero.
Yeah.
So we're going to be limited to feeling the object and imaging it with the sonar. Uh, and those are the methods we're going to use. So I think we can basically compare the object that we find with the Electra that we know. We know the size of it, we know the shape of it, we know the configuration of it, and hopefully we'll be able to determine the material of the object itself, which we can probably do by taking samples of the object and confirming that it is in fact aircraft aluminum.
Mm-hmm.
So using all that evidence, we believe it's possible to make a determination as to whether this is the Electra or it is something else.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure you've thought of a million different ways to approach this. I'm just going to throw it out there. When you're doing archaeology by Braille, if
Right.
if you can find the rivets and you can find some seams, you should be able to, even if you can't see it, draw that out, map it out, get some measurements on
Right.
those, and then compare that with the records. And I would think if that all lines up with her designs, that's pretty conclusive evidence.
I think so. I keep saying this, we won't really know until we get there, but We're going to be armed with as much information as possible.
Uh-huh.
We have a plan in place to actually look at a real Electra. There are two Electras that are at hand in this country that we can look at. One is at the Amelia Earhart Hangar Museum in Atchison, Kansas. That's one option. Another is the 10E that they have in the Museum of Flight in Seattle. We want to go there and look at it directly in the context of this project to get as familiar with it as possible, to get images of it as good as we can get, so that when we're on the island looking at the evidence of the tri-object, we can make direct comparisons between that and the actual aircraft.
Yeah. Yeah. The only other unsolicited advice I might throw out there, if you can create some sort of a portable what do you want to call it? Turbidity curtain, suspended turbidity curtain, like maybe get an inflatable and have a heavy curtain coming down, and make kind of a coffer dam of sorts, and using your pump fresh water into that and blow out the turbid water,
Right.
and you might be able to get something of a clear view down.
Yeah, and we've talked about that, Mike. I remember that. And I decided against that method because for two reasons. Logistically, it's very complex to bring those materials to the site and to deploy them, and it would take time to do all that. And then we don't know that the outcome would be any better than simply doing the suction dredge, removing sediment as carefully as possible. So, it's a matter of making choices based on the availability of time and resources that we have.
Yep.
It could be ultimately, if we determine this is in fact the aircraft, we might need to have a cofferdam built in order to do the full scale excavation. But we don't know. Another consideration is that the permit we get from Kiribati has to allow that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let me be clear just quickly that insofar as a cofferdam, it literally could be just a heavy kind of canvas cloth that's on a float and is weighted on the bottom. So it doesn't have to be a burdensome, rigid sided dam, so to speak. It could be just a floating one. But anyways, yeah, I'm sure you would have to have a way to pump fresh water in. I don't know if you can, somehow take advantage of your Venturi system and do that, using your dredge equipment. But food for thought.
Another thing in that regard, Mike, is that the sediment is so fine that even the current that's pumped into such an enclosure might end up disturbing the sediment.
Yeah.
So you may end up not having clear water even in the best of circumstances using that method.
Are you going to dig on land at all?
Pardon
Are
me?
you going to do any digging on land? Go to the 7 site or anything along those lines?
No. Our focus is purely on the tri-object. On land, we do plan to do surface survey in the vicinity along the beach and into the forest there so that we can see if perhaps artifacts from the site have been washed up onto land. We'll be sure to look there very carefully from that standpoint. We're also, of course, when we're doing the dredging, we'll have a screen there, and we may pull up some artifacts from the site that are caught in the screen, which will be another piece of evidence about what we're looking at.
Excellent. Well, it sounds very exciting. You've been public about this recently, and we saw you do some national news broadcasts. You've gotten some major press and some visibility.
Right.
Any particular reason for being more on the pro publicity side?
Right. Well, up until January of this year, I was really trying to keep it quiet, and we were doing fundraising privately. Mm-hmm. And we kind of reached a point at which no more money was coming in. We had gotten some pledges, but I became certain then that we need to go public with it in order to expand our network for fundraising purposes. And that actually proved to be a good choice, because very shortly after that, we've gotten a lot of contacts from others, not just media people, but most notably from Purdue University, who have become a major partner with us now. Purdue is also very impressed by the evidence that we have, and they've made a commitment to help us. So they've been helping us with logistical help, legal help, publicity help, media, connections, and so forth. And that's helped our project immeasurably. And they publicized it too. They put out a big press release on July 2nd, which was the anniversary of Amelia's disappearance. I went to Purdue. We had a press conference, a lot of media coverage there. We were on the Today Show after that, and all that has happened as a result of going public. And I'm very grateful to Purdue for their interest. And of course, they have a big reason for doing that because Amelia Earhart was on their faculty at the time she disappeared.
Wow.
Purdue actually purchased the aircraft and had it built for her for the world flight. So they have a very strong connection to Amelia Earhart. And they're very interested in helping us to identify and recover the aircraft. They would love to have that wreckage on their campus to display and to do scientific study. Anyway, so in answer to your question, going public proved to be a very good idea, and had a very good outcome for us. So we now believe that we have access to the funding that we need to make the project work. We're pretty far along in the permit process with Kiribati. We actually went to Taria several weeks ago to talk with government people there, and the connections we're building with the Kiribati government have been productive. We want to maintain connections with them going forward. I think it's really important for this project to be a benefit to the people of Kiribati, not simply a benefit to us and people in the West who are just interested in Amelia Earhart.
Yeah.
And turns out that Amelia Earhart is a big part of the history of Kiribati. They're very interested in it. They teach it in their schools. They have a high degree of interest. And beyond that, I think that there's a lot we can do to help Kiribati by publicizing them, their situation, and their culture. So I really feel like we've got a partnership with them that I want to maintain going forward.
Excellent. So, many of your colleagues in the search for Amelia Earhart are passionate people, dare I say, competitive in some ways. How have your colleagues reacted to your planned mission?
Well, there's quite a spectrum. Many people are very supportive, and we've gotten a lot of offers of assistance from people. Many people find our evidence to be quite compelling. There are some people who object to certain features of the evidence. Quite notably, within Tiger, Rick Gillespie himself has expressed his reservations about the object and its interpretation. He has claimed that it's a tree. Other people have suggested the same thing, whereas others have agreed with me that it doesn't appear to be a tree. That doesn't match the attributes of a tree. So there's quite a spectrum, and some people object that, well, Tiger was there in 2001. They looked on that beach, they found nothing. So, and it doesn't look like there's space for it there because it's shallow. But I have answers, as I said, I have answers for all that. And what it boils down to is that all we have to prove is that there is a case strong enough to justify going back to the island.
Mm-hmm.
That is the case we've made. I have not claimed that I know that that's the Electra. What I know is that somebody has to go and look at the Taria object, and that's going to be us. We decided to do that. We're going to do that, and it is a risk. We have to take that risk.
Yeah.
So people have asked me, well, what are you going to do if it turned out not to be the Electra? I'm going to be disappointed. But really, that's not the good question to ask. The question to ask is it worth going there or is it not? And it's worth going there. So whatever the outcome, we're going to go there. We're going to live with the consequences.
No, I love it. And when are you going?
In November.
November. Wow, it's coming up quick.
Yeah. November, we plan to depart from Majuro in our 2 ships on November 5th and return to Majuro by about November 22nd.
Wonderful.
It's a 6-day sail to the island, 5 days working on the island, another 6 days back to Majuro. And we're
Will
going
the
to
public?
deploy technology. We have a lot of technology to put on the island.
Well,
We're going to
yeah.
have Starlink connection and everything.
Will the public be able to follow your progress in real time?
Yes, our goal is to have connection to the internet continuously throughout the project. The boats both have Starlink internet connections. We're going to bring a Starlink antenna to the island. We're going to have a solar power station to power our equipment, and we're going to leave some equipment behind if we get permission from Kiribati to do that, including a security camera, weather station, uh, an instrument to measure the rise and fall of the tide, just for data collection, as well as a docking drone, so that if somebody comes to threaten the site, we can launch a drone and get some good pictures of them.
Wow, that's pretty
Yeah.
interesting.
And that's another question you might have asked: is what happened to the site after we're there? And we are concerned about it, but we've discussed that with the Kiribati Maritime Police. They have their patrol boats. They have electronic surveillance of every ship in their territory, and if necessary, they can bring in the New Zealand Air Force to help them.
Yeah. All right. Well, that would be quite a deterrent, I would say. So, well, that's terrific. I'm excited to see your progress on this. Have always, since we first started talking about this a number of years ago, felt it was a great argument, a likely uh, hypothesis. And if there's anything I can do to help, please let me know. And I hope the audience watching this, if they can help you as well, they
But yeah,
reach out.
I should right. I should mention that the main place to go for information is archaeologychannel.org/Taria, Taraia, and go there. You can see all the links we have. You can get access to all the information that we have to summarize our case. And there's a link there where you can actually make a contribution if you want to help us to fund this project. And I encourage people to do that. If they really want to help, they can do that. And as I mentioned, we will be in contact with the world throughout the course of the project of the field work.
Yeah. Well, Rick, thank you so much for your time. Best of luck to you on your upcoming mission. I'm going to be following it day by day as you go, and very excited to see the ultimate outcome. And with that being said, I would encourage everyone listening to ponder the implications and spread the word, and stay tuned for the next episode of Underground. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Mark.